TorahCafe.com.
In the 1800s, when the British Empire encircled the globe, a Jewish magnate living in London became internationally famous for his philanthropy to Jews and non-Jews, and especially towards his brethren in the Holy Land. Sir Moses Montefiore, relative and business partner of Nathan Rothschild. In 1837, he became the first Jew to attain high office in London, serving as sheriff, and was knighted by Queen Victoria in celebration of his extraordinary generosity. He was once asked, "Sir Moses, what are you worth?" He named a figure that seemed far too small. "But surely," he was pressed, "your wealth must be much more than that." Sir Moses replied, "You didn't ask me how much I own. You asked me how much I am worth. So I calculated how much I have given to charity this year." You see, he explained, we are only worth what we are willing to share with others. Certainly, Moses Montefiore did not invent his altruistic attitude. It predates the original Moses, stemming from the first Jew, Abraham, and it echoes throughout our nation today, more predominantly than at any time in history. We are most fortunate to have with us at the retreat a panel of 3 leading philanthropists. Mr. George Rohr is JLI's principal benefactor and the visionary force behind its founding and continued growth. He is also the visionary benefactor largely responsible for the expansion of Chabad centers on university campuses across the globe and multiple institutions and initiatives dedicated to Jewish continuity and securing a bright Jewish future. Mr. David Magerman from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is a noted philanthropist and the founder of the Kohelet Foundation, which has rapidly emerged as a powerful force in the world of Jewish education and a pillar in JLI's continued growth and expansion. Mr. Michael Scharf is a celebrated philanthropist, the president of Palm Beach Synagogue, Florida, and a generous supporter of Chabad's outreach efforts to college students internationally and multiple causes in Jewish literacy and education. Today, they offer us intellectual philanthropy by sharing their experiences and insights, supplying us with unique perspectives into the mitzvah of tzedakah. The panel will be moderated by Mrs. Holly Cohen, Executive Director of the Kohelet Foundation, and a light for Jewish education and continuity nationwide.
I've been working in the field of in the nonprofit field of Jewish day school education for about the past 10 years. Before that, I did it more as a lay leader. Now, for the last 10 years, I've been the executive director of the Kohelet Foundation. David Magerman is the president of the Kohelet Foundation. So that's a little bit how I find myself here. And we're going to talk about philanthropy today to some really amazing philanthropists. Now, I'm going to say that I don't have a bio for each of the people. I could give the bio for David, but I'm not going to because I don't have Mr. Scharf's bio. I'm going to actually let Mr.
There's not much to it.
I'm just going to let you start. I'm going to ask you to start and, save me the embarrassment of getting it all wrong. If you would just tell us, in just a few sentences, in a minute or two, a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in this position.
I was asked to be here. I don't know exactly why. But I think Rabbi Mintz may have approached me at the RJ, the Republican Jewish Coalition in Las Vegas, and I didn't know what this was. I'm a big devotee and fan of Chabad. I have been for a long time, and I knew of the Jewish Learning Institute, but I didn't know the scope and range of its activities, and he then sent me about 20 books of all these courses, and I started going through them, and I said, geez, this is really remarkable. So I decided to come to this conference after being invited, and the only thing I can say is I'm overwhelmed. It is so impressive. It is so the level of erudition of the speakers, the substantive nature of the subjects that are being taught. And I know the person who's most instrumental in this, friend George Rohr. And George, what you started here is just astounding, remarkable, every superlative word I could think of. And the future of the Jewish people, the success of the Jewish religion going forward, has to be developed within contexts such as this. So it's just an honor to be here. And about myself, there's nothing much to say.
That's probably not true, but okay. So so welcome George also, and I'm gonna give George and then David just like a minute to sort of tell you a little tiny bit about themselves.
I was born in Bogota, Colombia. Total Jewish population at its peak, 6,000 Jews. There are more than that within a 5-minute drive of where we're sitting. It was a very warm, close Jewish community. I had never heard the words Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, or Reconstructionist until I came to the States to go to college. We were all Jews. It was all united. Some may have been less observant. Some have been more observant. But we were one community, and there was a tremendous amount of support and love and closeness that really set for me kind of a baseline of what, in an odd sort of way, what an ideal community would be. And and the world calls it philanthropy, so let's use that term for now. My philanthropy is meaningfully informed by that place and the sense that every Jew is precious, that every Jew counts. Interactions that I was privileged to have with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zechuso Yagan Aleinu, only reinforced, magnified, expanded all of those things. I'm just so honored to be here with David and with Michael and with all of you to share our ideas on how we think about tzedakah.
David.
Yeah, so I'm David Magerman, the president of the Kohelet Foundation. I grew up unobservant and in a kind of lower middle class environment, and stumbled into, well, my whole life, but kind of stumbled into my education, stumbled into my opportunities, which God has blessed me with success in business and resources, and then honestly stumbled into philanthropy with some missteps and not really guided by any principles. And I think, thank God I've been at least paying attention to the mistakes I've made, and over time discovered that there's actually a Torah and laws that govern tzedakah and philanthropy, and ways of giving within the Jewish world that are both constructive and destructive. And as I've come along, I had the blessings to meet Holly Cohen and hire her as the director of my foundation, and together we've I think hopefully matured and grown into finding responsible ways of giving Jewishly and having a positive impact on the Jewish community and the Jewish world. And you really here, I'm honored to be here and happy to share my experiences and the lessons I've learned about philanthropy over the years.
So David, we're actually going to start with you. You're going to get the first question. Can you talk about the first time that you made a sizable donation to a worthy cause? What was that like for you? Was it difficult? And what pushed you to do it?
So I accidentally bought a building. That was my...
That is so true.
That was my introduction to, Jewish giving, responsible Jewish giving, that a friend of mine who I was meeting in a business context, was the meeting before I met with him, was lamenting that he was the president of a Jewish school and there was a building they were trying to buy, but they could only afford to buy it or renovate it. They couldn't afford both. And anyway, don't worry about that. Let's just have our meeting. And by the end of the meeting, I decided I was going to buy the building and donate it to what I thought was going to be to 2 schools to share. Then they ended up disagreeing, or Rabbi Ussered it, and we ended up giving it to a different school. It's all a long story, but the thing about it was, and the interesting thing was that I actually never stepped foot in the building until probably a year after I bought it. And it was all, and again, this was the beginning of my journey, recognizing that I probably ought to do this a little bit more responsibly and a little bit more thoughtfully. But I didn't have a great appreciation for what the power of the money that I had could do, and also learning from the experience with the Rebbeim of the community and finding out that what I was proposing to do was actually not acceptable and not going to be allowed, and that was a real chiddush to me. So all of it was really, like I said, as I said in the beginning, I stumbled into philanthropy. I think I stumbled into building ownership and learned a lot in the process.
And now we'll go to George. Did you have a role model? I mean, I know the answer to this question, but I want to hear the answer. I want everyone to hear the answer. Did you have a role model that showed you how to give? Who was that?
I certainly did have a role model. Holly, you're not surprised it was my father of blessed memory, who instilled in my sisters and me very, very, I would say even aggressively, a sense of obligation that we have towards tzedakah. From the time that we were little and we would get allowances, it was monitored with strict discipline that 10% would be set aside and given to tzedakah. Accounts were kept. We had to have discussions about how it was going to be given away. And then really watching him, as I mentioned, growing up in Bogota, Colombia, and subsequently here in the United States, and how he thought about tzedakah, really has informed the way that I go about it.
Thank you. Okay, Michael, what are the personal benefits of being a funder, a philanthropist?
Well, I don't know that I can state that plurally. The one benefit that I get from giving tzedakah is it just makes me feel good. I was always taught by my parents to do it. They always did it. They, like George's parents, were remarkable examples of generosity, of helping people, and they really set a standard that just stayed with me, and it sort of came naturally when I achieved some success in business, and even before that, when I didn't have much success, I was always trying to help people and give tzedakah, and it just makes me feel good. I think I benefit more than the recipient in many ways.
When people want to bestow honor on you for your giving, is that like, how do you react to that? Is that something that you love? Is that something that you try to avoid? Do you live with it? Can you just tell us what that experience is like for you?
Well, the only reason I give is so that I get all the credit and glory, and so I get to sit up here with these big-time guys, and we get to pontificate and exchange ideas. Actually, it is, and I really would be curious to hear from both of my panel colleagues how they would answer this, if it's okay, Holly. But it's excruciating. It really goes completely against my nature. I really want to always decline those things. Not because people say, "Oh, you're so humble." You have no idea how humble I am. I am so humble, but it's generally I find it very, very unpleasant, and my first instinct is always to say no. And for my wife, it's even more dramatic. She cringes every time some of those things happen. Yet at the same time, through years and years of observing and experience, I find that it actually sometimes is accretive to the cause. It actually, part of the donation is lending my name to it. And I've seen in very concrete ways over the years that it motivates other people to give more than they otherwise would have. People who may have greater resources than I would say, oh well, if he's putting himself out there and participating, lending his name, giving X, then I have to give at least as much or more. Or people who might not have considered giving at all, as a result of that, might do that. And then people who, by the way, I'm not holding out my nature and my proclivities as the model. There's nothing wrong with liking, feeling comfortable, enjoying the limelight. I think that's absolutely fine. There are many such people, and when they see that such honor is available, they too want to rise to the occasion, and that motivates them to give. Their motive does not have to be pure. The bottom line is write the check, right? So that's the point.
I think we'd all like to hear from everybody on this question.
I think early when I was younger, and I'd asked if I would be an honoree, I would typically accept. And as I got older and I got married when I was 40, I married Fiona, who, like George's wife, is rather self-effacing, and she just can't stand these dinners and honors, and I don't really like them either. I have a room filled with awards. Some are big awards. Those are the ones from Chabad. They tend to, it's like flowers on Shavuos. We could open a flower store. But I have them all. None of them are hanging. They're all in a room, but it's difficult to resist some of these requests that you get. And I don't like to almost never accept honors anymore. I see my rabbi from Palm Beach here. He talked me into being one of the 3 honorees at the 25th anniversary dinner of the shul, Rabbi Moshe Shiner. And if you're not inclined to be generous with tzedakah, he's not the person to become friendly with. But I think giving should just be giving. You don't. It always baffles me. You sort of touched on this, George. It baffles me, and I don't like to ask people to give. I mean, I know people living in Palm Beach, the Palm Beach Country Club, multi-billionaires. I just don't like to ask them to give. I think some people are naturally, some developed. Some people are givers. They give with a warm hand. They want to give. Other people give reluctantly or for awards or the public honor that they receive. It's just very, very different. But I've never really had that need, and neither did my parents.
Thank you. David?
So I found myself in an interesting situation of giving to, in many cases, the schools that my kids or my kids' friends went to, and I actually created the Cohen Foundation name as a subterfuge so no one would know it was me. That worked really well. But I also, I was early on, I was convinced that as a younger philanthropist that there was a value to putting my name behind gifts and to being more out there with that I was giving, to be a role model. And largely I found that didn't work. And not to say that I regret doing it and trying it, but I think that I always view it as a strategic decision of whether my association, my name, my presence will add value to the cause. The truth is, just by my nature, sometimes my involvement was actually a negative, and I ended up being a great fundraising tool for the other side, whatever that side was. And
that also actually happened.
Many schools have been built on the backs of fighting against my mission. Quite proud of that, but I think that it's really a question of what you're accomplishing, and I think that I know people who don't have so many financial resources don't always see this, but there's actually a price that you pay in socially and in the community for being an out there philanthropist, and I think it's a price that I'm honored and feel obligated to pay because it's part of the mission. And I view everything that I do in philanthropy as being, mission driven. And so, if my name will add value to the cause, then I'll put my name. And if my name will have no value, I'm happy to leave it off. I think there are certain places where it's just enough of a value add that it's worth putting me out there, and whatever the price may be.
Okay, thank you. All right, David, we're going to actually go with you for the next question. What's it like to decline a worthy cause? How does that make you feel? How do you handle those situations?
Well, that's why I have you.
That's a little bit true. But really talk about why you have me to do that. Like, what is it that why is that uncomfortable for you?
So I think that this is something that's evolved over time as well. I think, I view philanthropy kind of like being a doctor. This is kind of a new analogy that I've come to view, that I have a specialty, and my specialty is Jewish education. It's like a surgeon who only operates on hearts. And it's not as though if someone came up to me, if I was a doctor and said, I'm having chest pains, I wouldn't say, well, I'm not that kind of doctor, so, I can't help you. If I had some idea of what was going on, I would help. And in the case where I get some request that's really worthwhile for donations or philanthropy that is outside the realm of what I do, I sometimes do it anyway. But I have to recognize that I have a mission, and God's given me the resources I have, and my kind of single-mindedness to focus on trying to solve a problem in the Jewish world. And if I say yes to every cause, I'll get involved in a lot of different things which will dilute my efforts, and I want to remain focused. So I think I view it as a godly mission to focus on what I'm doing, and I feel like, especially if this is something that is a worthy cause, there are people in the community who will help. And I try to direct them to a rabbi, to a communal institution, to other philanthropists who I think will help them. But I feel, and I don't feel good about it in the moment, but I feel ultimately like I have got to be responsible with what I'm doing. And sometimes that means deflecting certain requests and focusing on the things that I'm here to do.
Do either Michael or George want to weigh in on that one? What's it like to deny someone? And you may know it's a worthy cause, but what is that like?
Look, there are so many worthy causes. I think philanthropy does require some degree of focus. And my focus has ultimately been Chabad, excuse me, because I think from what I've seen over many years, and I'm by far the oldest person on this panel, where you get the most bang for your buck in terms of Jewish education, in terms of instilling and enhancing Jewish values, is with Chabad. There's nothing that approaches it. That's not to denigrate other organizations, but from what I've seen, and I was a person who bought troubled businesses and tried to fix them. And I see many institutions, Jewish institutions, unfortunately, that are troubled, that are bloated with bureaucracy and have all these programs that don't accomplish much. And then I see Chabad with the intensity and the fervor and the ability and the dedication and the commitment. And that's where I choose to focus with my philanthropy.
The only thing I would add, Holly, to the answers that David and Michael gave is that I find it extremely painful to have to say no. And I, for the reasons that David so clearly laid out, exactly those reasons, I find myself very often having to say no. I do think, though, that we have an obligation in saying no to explain clearly, honestly, and compassionately why we are saying no to the person to whom we are saying no. And it goes, it's no substitute for the check, but it goes a long way not only to making me feel better, but it does make the organization or the fundraiser understand, have context. And I've even gotten notes back from people saying that's the nicest no I've ever gotten. So it is worth doing that, and that because it's really tough to raise money under the best of circumstances. And so I think we owe it to, not just out of courtesy, but just as a constructive gesture, to explain why it is that we're saying no.
Thank you. All right, George. So I think you a little bit touched on this before, but I want to dig in. What would you say to someone who says he or she doesn't want to give because this person wouldn't be giving for the right reasons?
Suck it up. Write the check. The bottom line is your motive does not have to be pure. This is the reason why there's no bracha for giving tzedakah. There's no special Yehi Ratzon or L'Shem Yichud or anything that you have to say before you give charity. You just have to do it. It shouldn't require preparation. It shouldn't require concentration, proper kavana, anything else. All those things are wonderful, and if you do it, that's great. But it doesn't. If the poor person needs to eat, whether your intent is pure in giving the money or not, doesn't matter. Just give the money. Okay,
thank you. Okay, Michael, so I think you just outed yourself as perhaps being the oldest person on the panel. So I'm going to ask you this question. What are some key teachings about tzedakah for parents and teachers that you think need to be instilled in the next generation?
I think we've touched on some of them when George was explaining his background. I think you have to instill in children early on the importance of giving, tzedakah, also other values that align themselves with Jewish values, being kind to your friends, not speaking badly of people. I think you have to be involved in creating a total person. I have 2 little grandsons. One is 4 and one is 2. And even at this point in time, I was with them last weekend on Long Island, and I try to instill in them values that they don't realize what I'm trying to do, but I think it has to start it doesn't necessarily have to start at an early age, but if you are inculcated with the value of helping people and combined with proper Jewish values, I think that's really the necessity and something that behooves all of us to do. In our society, which is living in Palm Beach, one is exposed to this. It's the ultimate, the parking lot of the Palm Beach Country Club's like a Bentley dealership. But sometimes, I remember my interview for the club, and 2 people came to our house. We just lived in Palm Beach for 7-8 months. They come to the house, and one of the fellows says, Jewish fellow, most people in the country club are Jewish. He says to me, I had to give 5 years detail of my charitable contributions. And he looks at me and he says, I see your contributions. Most of them go to Jewish things. I said, I found that was a little odd comment. I said, yeah, they do go to Jewish things. They've always gone to primarily Jewish things. I give to other things as well. Primarily Jewish things. But that's where my values are. That's what I deem to be important. And I have from the time I was very little. So I think that's the only advice that I could give is start early and set an example, as my parents did.
So I think both of our other panelists would like to add something.
Yeah. So the question was about parents and teachers, and I think that one of the problems we have is that we don't live in a Torah society. We live in a Western. We live in a Greek-Roman influenced. They call it Judeo-Christian, but I would say it's a Western society where money is an absolute value. And I think that we have to differentiate for our children and have both our parents and teachers differentiate for our children what is the money that you live on, the sustenance that feeds you, that gives you housing and subsistence housing, not mansion housing. What is the resources that you have that give you the luxuries in life, the iPhone, the fast internet access, all the things that we kind of take for granted as a given but are actually luxuries. And what is the real excess that we have beyond that is really beyond what we could ever imagine needing. And I think that if we could teach our children to differentiate among those different kinds of money, we might get them to strive a little less for craving that third level and focus on making sure that they have for their families the first level, and maybe trying in the midst of their community support and support for the needs of their fellow man, trying to get that second kind of money. And then when, God willing, you get to the point where you're given the responsibility of overseeing the third kind of money, that you recognize that it's an obligation to share that with those that are less fortunate. But I think that, so many times in the schools that I'm involved with, the parents and even sometimes the teachers push the students to crave that third level as a start, be uber successful, magnifying the outsized results in the community. And I think that while it's God forbid not a bad thing, I'm proud of what I've done in my life and I appreciate what I've been given. But I think that I know growing up in a lower middle class environment, growing up with that subsistence level, my parents did a great job raising me, and they provided for me. And that as I grew and started having that second level of I can afford a few nice things and get a nicer apartment and all that, that was also a blessing, and I was glad to have that. But I think that we just need to impress upon our children that a dollar is not every dollar is not a dollar. That the dollar that you use to buy bread is something that we all should have. But everything else beyond that is something that we don't need to sacrifice the values in our life to achieve. And I think if we did more of that in our schools, we'd have less problems raising money in philanthropy.
I think if we can inculcate in our children the fundamental idea that the money is not theirs, that the wealth is not ours. It's not ours. It's given to us by the Almighty for His own reasons, by way of seeing what good we can do with it. So you're a custodian of that money, Junior, even at age 6, 7, 8, whenever it is that it's appropriate to start talking to your child in these terms. What we have is not ours. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving it to us on loan. Just like He gave it to us, He can take it away in a nanosecond. We've seen this happen. People lose fortunes, they lose their homes, they lose even subsistence level. That level of income, that dollar to buy bread is not available. Nothing is guaranteed. It doesn't belong to you. All you have control over is how well you're going to use it.
That's beautiful. Okay. All right, George. I think that, I don't know, I've heard this comment a little bit just in some conversations over the course of the retreat now, but we know that there are a lot of wealthy Jewish people in this world. Some of the wealthiest people, especially in this country, are Jewish, and that they do give, I think, a disproportionate amount of the charity that goes out there into the world. But not so much of that is going to Jewish causes. So what do we do about that? How do we get all that Jewish money that's going to, all these other things? How do we, to what? To dog hospitals. Yeah, I mean, even to United Way or to, Teach for America. How do we get that money into our Jewish organizations?
Well, I think implicit in your question, Holly, are two things. One is exactly that. How does that funding go to Jewish causes? But also, what's the denominator? What's the arithmetic of this? People, and we all know folks like this, people of means who feel extremely generous when they give to a cause, whether a Jewish or non-Jewish cause. They feel like they've done a very good thing. But relative to what they should be giving, it's just not meaningful. And it's not because they're bad people. They're good people with good intentions, but they just don't know. They are Jewishly illiterate in general. And when it comes to tzedakah, they just don't have a clue. They don't have a clue as to what the percentage should be, that it has to be a minimum of 10%, ideally more, up to 20%, but certainly a minimum of 10%. And they also don't know how to think about prioritizing it. So it's not a matter of bad intent, I don't believe. I mean, I have friends and acquaintances who really are sweet, wonderful, good people who really want to do good in the world. I mean, just as an aside, Michael, you know this because you lived in New York for many years, but the system of apartment ownership in New York City, for the most part, has been co-op apartments, not condo apartments. So you have to be approved to buy an apartment in certain buildings in New York by the cooperative board, which are your neighbors. And as part of that, you have to submit a whole board package with several years of tax returns and reference letters and all of that. And members of your building, other residents of the building, are on the board, and they get to review these packages. So I was on the board for a couple of years of our building, and so I got to review these packages. And these, you can't imagine the exuberant letters of recommendation that people would write for people applying to buy an apartment. So generous to others less fortunate than they, and they're so, their involvement to those. And then you look at the tax return, and it's $1,000 to the United Way. I mean, it's right there, right? And the tax return, that same document, you can see what 100% of their income was for that year, right? So now this is an extreme case that I just described to you, but there are broad ranges in between. So it's just, I think it's a function of illiteracy about what the level should be. People don't have the ambition that they should have to give because they just don't know. My late father-in-law had a great line. Oh, that guy has really deep pockets and really short arms. But the short arms are, I think, because they need to be educated. So what do we do about that? I think it's obvious to say, but I think we need to do a much, much better job in educating everybody, not just people of means, but everybody about what our tradition demands of us in terms of tzedakah. How much to give, how to think about it, how to prioritize, what to worry about if your intent is not pure. Should your gift be publicized? Shouldn't it be publicized? All of those things. I mean, we have sources for all of that. That's just a preview of something that everyone in this room is going to get. We're going to give out a gift later.
That was a good tie-in. I mean, you've had different levels of involvement in terms of the organizations to which you've given. So what do you feel is like a comfortable level of involvement with an organization when you're giving?
So I learned the hard way that there's a difference between investing in your giving and donations. And early on, I got turned on to the idea of entrepreneurial philanthropy, which meant getting very involved in the business of the organization you're giving to, and really viewing it as though I'm buying shares in a school, or I'm buying shares in a communal institution, and I'm going to sit on the board, and I'm going to, use my brilliance and wisdom, because I'm so brilliant and wise, to tell them how to do their jobs and to guide them to success. And there was a lot of hubris in that, and a lot of arrogance, and a lot of failure. And what I learned is that there is a time to invest in something when you're a professional with skills where because of your knowledge and background and education, what they should be doing. For the most part, for myself, not being a very Torah-educated Jew with a background in computer science, but not a background in most of the things that I contribute to, it's not really appropriate for me to be involved. I've learned a lot as a layperson about Jewish education. I'm not an educator. I shouldn't be telling a head of school or an administration how to do their job. And I think that a lot of times when you give with strings attached and you give with the expectation of being deeply involved, you're actually hurting in some ways even more than you're helping with net with your gift. And I've learned to let go of, again, the money that we have is not ours. We're shluchim for it. And I don't view myself as very possessive of it. And if I give to an organization as a donation, it's a gift. And actually, I was just meeting with someone today where I said that, and they said, no, we're actually doing something involving digital media and online work where we actually want your help. I said, great, I'll give you a gift. And afterwards, if you want my help with no strings attached, come and ask me, and I'm sure I'll volunteer my time as well. But the idea that by virtue of giving to an organization, you've earned some right to control it, I think is a misunderstanding. A gift is a gift. An investment where you buy shares, it doesn't really happen in philanthropy. And so I think that's the fundamental difference. And so really, I expect to have no involvement unless I'm invited because people think I'm actually useful. And frankly, typically I'm not. And so really happy to support causes that I believe in and let the people who are best suited to execute the plans to execute them.
Thank you. Michael, if you could change one thing in the sphere of Jewish philanthropy, what would that be?
I think it goes back to what George was just saying. Jewish philanthropy, well, you start with the fact that there are givers and there are people who feel some discomfort in giving. Even among religious, observant Jews, that's the case. So one thing that's required, though, or would be very helpful, is a greater dedication on the part of Jewish parents to Jewish education. Because the values that a child will learn in a Jewish education, I mean, one of them is philanthropy and helping other people, and that's really important. And you don't get that in the secular curriculum as I examine it and see it today. So I think that's the one thing that I would try to work on as much as possible and devote as much resources to as possible. And it's you have this opportunity among the young. You also have the opportunity among high school students and college students. I mean, I'm most familiar with Princeton, and the largest effect on Jewish students at Princeton has been the Chabad House. They go there, they feel comfortable with their Judaism. Some of them have never been inside even a Reformed temple in their lives, but they develop some knowledge, they develop comfort, and they develop directly and by osmosis Jewish values, which include philanthropy. So I think this whole trying to educate the Jewish people as much as possible will ultimately redound to the benefit of Jewish institutions.
So this question is actually for all three of you. You can answer in any order. But was there a moment when you decided now is the time to start giving, or now is the time to give back?
Yeah, the first allowance we got, it wasn't a choice.
No, well, that's really powerful, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't grow up in a house with a lot of Torah explicitly, a lot of Jewish values, but not a lot of explicit Torah. And my first gifts were to my alma mater, to Penn, to Doctors Without Borders, to very secular causes. And it really wasn't until I started studying Torah and understanding that there were laws that governed how you do this that I really understood not only that putting on tefillin and davening and keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat, that those are among the laws, and one of them is tzedakah, or a set of laws is around tzedakah. And so, to me, it was the same commandedness which causes me to wake up in the morning and put a tefillin. It eventually became the commandedness I felt to give tzedakah, and whether I have the money I have, or a tenth of it, or 1% of it, or 1/10 of 1% of it, I still think that we all have that same obligation to give tzedakah, just like we do all the other mitzvahs.
Thank you. Michael?
I don't know. I can't recall the one event that prompted my giving pattern, but I'd just like to share one story with you. And it doesn't involve tzedakah, it involves Israel bonds. After my first trip to Israel in 73, right after this, 2 weeks after the Yom Kippur War, I came back. It was an Israel bond trip. I got active. I started the new leadership division of Israel bonds. And we were going to have an event in New York, a hotel, to sell Israel bonds to all the members of new leadership. And a new director of fundraising for Israel bonds came to New York from Chicago, a fellow named Dave Zeisman, who later became head fundraiser at Yeshiva University. And we weren't going to call cards or the names of people at this event. And he heard about this, and he said, I have to meet with you. And he was a very stern, wonderful man, but very stern. He said to me, you're not having this event unless you call cards. He said, that's not what we're doing anymore. I said, Mr. Zeisman, these are young people. You know, that we're not looking, we're just looking to get them involved, more involved with Israel. He said, no card calling, no event. So I spoke to friends of mine whom I knew were going to come and buy bonds. And I said to them, look, just tell me your commitment so I'll call on you, the first 12 or so that I spoke to. I'll call on you first. I won't call in any descending order because I think that's really obnoxious, because everybody should buy bonds in accordance with how much they think they can afford or want to. And the same thing with tzedakah. I don't like this descending order of calling for contributions. So they all told me the amount of bonds they were going to buy. When I called the names of these 12 people, 9 of them increased the amount, okay? There was this sort of public pressure, I guess, that influenced them. And it from that point on, I said, I'm going to give as much as I can, and I'm not going to ask people. I find myself very reluctant to ask people or to pressure people for a contribution. I just don't like to do it. The rabbi knows this, that I don't like to do it. But I've always felt it was important from the time I was little. And I don't know how one replicates that unless you have the right parents.
Okay, we have just 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask each of you to just make a brief comment about this question. You have been blessed with great wealth. Not everyone is in the same financial position that you find yourselves in. What advice would you give to a normal person about giving?
So I've been blessed with financial wealth, but I haven't been blessed with Torah wealth. And I think that what I would tell people is that money is not the measure of all things. It's not the measure of most things. And whatever blessings you have, whatever wealth you have, if it's the ability to save lives, the ability to teach people, the ability to spread Torah, that is your wealth. And don't worry so much about the number of zeros on the check you write. Worry about what you're contributing to the world and what of the wealth that you've been given are you helping the Jewish people with.
George?
I would come back to the insight that at all levels, what you have is not yours, and you have to be a very responsible, thoughtful custodian of how you're going to use it, to allocate your tzedakah in a way that makes sense, that fulfills our obligations under what's required of us in the Torah, and that the number of zeros really don't matter, and just remember that it's all there on loan, not only with respect to the financial resources, but even what David added to his comments, the ability to spend the time, the ability to give of your talents, the ability to give of your heart in different ways, that's also not yours. And you have to use it wisely.
Michael?
I would just say, give whatever you think is meaningful to you. but be honest with yourself in that assessment.
Thank you. So thanks, everyone.